Thank you, Patrick, for that reflection. Now I'm going to turn the meeting over to our moderator, Liz McCormick. Liz is an assistant professor in architecture at UNC Charlotte, a licensed architect, and a lead accredited professional.
Thanks, John, and great to see you all tonight. I have the pleasure of introducing our guest speakers, and then we'll address questions at the end of the session. So as John said, go ahead and put your questions in the chat as they come up, and we will respond to them after the presentation. So first, I will introduce Roxanne Mcdonough. She is a member service specialist for the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. And there she supports the teams with energy optimization programs, member integration, events, marketing, communications. She is also an adjunct instructor at Carolina College Community College for the Construction Technologies program, where she also received her degrees in construction technology and sustainable technologies. Diane Coleman is currently a project manager for the U.S. Green Building Council, where she manages engagement with target sectors around the USGBC and GBCI's core programs addressing health, wellness, and equity, and resiliency and sustainability. She works with green building owners, designers, developers, members, and volunteers to expand sustainable, healthy, equitable, and economically strong buildings and communities. Diane supports all of the USGBC product offerings, such as LEAD, she collaborates on opportunities to advance sustainability goals, celebrates accomplishments, and facilitates valuable connections throughout our community. With that, I will pass it off to, I think, Roxanne, you're in the driver's seat first.
All right, thank you so much, Liz, and thank you, John, and thank you, Patrick, and thank you, everybody, for being here today. Hopefully this will be a great introduction to green building, and we can have a even better discussion at the end. So I'm going to begin. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat box, as Liz said, so we can address them at the end. So green building. Sorry, my slides didn't work for just a moment. What is green building? So this is a lot of words, but this was the most concise definition I could find. Green building is the practice of creating structures that are environmentally responsible and resource efficient. And we would like that to be within the entire life cycle of the structure, from design, construction, all the way to the end where the building eventually will have to be deconstructed and removed. Green buildings are also known as sustainable buildings or high performance buildings. This definition is the foundation of what we call the 5 pillars of green building, which is energy, health, materials, water, and places. So when we're thinking about designing and building a green building, there's a few things to think about. Things such as, how much energy will this building use from construction to deconstruction, and where will that energy come from? The health of the occupants that are going to live inside that building, and how healthy is the air that they breathe? Are materials being considered? Are they locally sourced? What measures are we planning to use to conserve water and waste removal? And can we do all of this with the least amount of damage to the natural environment and the biodiversity of our planet? Can we design this building to utilize things like the sun for passive heating and cooling, which decreases the need for heating and cooling that is energy based? So any building can be a green building, whether it's your home, your office, your hospital, your community center, any type of building, provided that it includes the features on this particular slide. And there are several features which make a building green. Some of these include efficient use of energy, water, and resources, use of renewables, which everybody hears a lot about, such as solar or wind, reducing our pollution and waste, and something that is not thought of very often, but is extremely important, which is enabling the use and reuse of recycled building materials. Usually those materials end up directly in the landfill. And we do not have a lot of standards for reusing these materials. Good indoor environmental air quality, which has become exceptionally important during this time of COVID, where we are spending so much additional time inside of our homes. And many people might not realize, but the air quality of inside of our buildings is usually not nearly as good as the air quality outside. Can we use materials that are non-toxic, that are ethical and sustainable? Are we considering the environment around us in the design and operation? And are we considering the quality of life of the occupants? Because if the occupants are not comfortable, nobody will want to live there or work there. And are we designing a building that enables adaptation to a changing environment and climate? So green building importance today, evidence is quickly growing that green building brings multiple benefits. It provides some of the most effective means to achieve a wide range of global goals, such as climate change, creating sustainable, affordable, and thriving communities, and driving massive economic growth. The benefits of green building are easily grouped into these three categories: environmental, economic, and social. Environmental benefits. Another piece of information that I really like to share, I share with my students on the first day of class, and I'll share with you all today, that our built environment, which is the environment that is built around us, our buildings and the maintenance of those buildings, uses greater than 40% of all the energy created in the United States. And that actually includes the energy we are producing from renewables. On top of that, 50% of that energy is used on heating and cooling applications inside those buildings. So from an environmental standpoint, green buildings can help reduce and eliminate many negative impacts on the environment. They use less water, they use less energy, we use less natural resources, and there's also the potential for positive impacts because some of these buildings generate their own energy on site, and they're taking into account the biodiversity of the land, of the environment. So this slide just kind of proves what I stated in the slide prior about the stats on our built environment. And you can see here in orange that between building operations and construction materials, our built environment does in fact use almost greater than 40% of all the US energy consumption. So a little food for thought on that statistic is that if our buildings are using greater than 40% of all of the energy, it is also going to be responsible for 40% of the carbon emissions as well. Scary stuff. This next slide is just some additional statistics, but I thought they were very important in this conversation today. You can see on the left side is a little chart that shows how building efficiency is one of the most affordable way to cut carbon emissions. And you can see on the graph that buildings offer the easiest and cheapest way to cut carbon emissions in the world. But we're talking United States here. And then on the right, you can see the average savings of a green building anywhere from 30% energy savings to 90% waste savings, 50% water savings. And these are not to sneeze at savings. I mean, they're substantial, especially in our lower income and populations that would really need these savings. So green buildings, they offer many, many economic and financial benefits to a wide range of people and groups of people all over the world. And these include things like lower utility bills for residents, for tenants, for renters, energy and water efficiency, lower construction costs, higher property values, things like massive job creation for all construction industry fields. Energy efficiency and green building is propelling into the future exponentially, and there is a large base for job creation. Also, building owners report that a green building, whether it is new or renovated, can command up to a 7% increase in asset value over a traditionally constructed building. So when evaluating true sustainability of a product, and today in our conversation, our product is our built environment and our buildings, we also need to take into account the effects of the materials and the products on the communities. This is not just in the benefit of the residents, but also in regards to the factory workers, workers responsible for the disassembly at the end of the life cycle, the miners and the harvesters of the materials, and the effects of manufacturing on those who live near production facilities, landfills, and construction sites. Historically disadvantaged communities continue to bear the burden of these issues. They also continue to bear the greatest burden of pollution and higher energy bills and lower home durability due to the fact that our buildings are aging. I read a study where in 2013, the median age of a home in the United States was 37 years old. And by mid-century, much of our existing building stock will be around 70 years old. And again, our historically disadvantaged communities continue to be the residents of those buildings. If you can afford, a green building, you probably don't need one as much as someone who can't afford it. Some of the practices used in green building, I've listed a few here. We could have went really deep in the weeds on this one. So I selected 5 of my personal favorites that I think are super important. You can see that I've italicized and underlined weatherization and retrofits. Weatherization and retrofits are a great return of investment project for our aging housing stock and for our lower income communities. A lot of the homes in these areas they're aging and they have lackluster insulation and they're under insulated and their HVAC systems are aged and they have health and safety issues that need to be addressed. New construction, if you're thinking of new construction, there's always the green building certification pathways that you can follow to help achieve a green building. LEED is one of those certifications, and Diane will be happy to talk about that, I think, within the next couple slides. Number 3 on the list is renewables, which I think, again, everybody is starting to get really familiar with. You're seeing commercials on the TV for the solar companies and installation. You hear them on the radio. But North Carolina is really prime for solar and wind. We are only number 2 behind California in use of solar, and we have massive potential for wind energy on the East Coast. And number 4, environmentally responsible materials and or building practices. So again, are we thinking about life cycle? Once the building is built, it doesn't just sit there forever. It's going to eventually need to be disposed of. And those materials have to go somewhere, and that is usually the landfill. Are we conserving resources during the process of designing this building? Are we sourcing locally? Are we using alternate building materials? And building practices. Are we looking at better techniques that will improve our building envelope for the long haul? And number 5 is probably my favorite, but not many people are aware of it. It's called systems thinking. And I will actually talk about that in the next upcoming slides and explain that a little better. So this slide is just a sample of some of the more advanced energy efficient materials and techniques on the market. And eco panels I selected for this slide because they are actually based out of North Carolina. Their main office is in Asheville, North Carolina, and their manufacturing plant is in Mocksville. So eco panels has been recognized by the Department of Energy for their energy efficient design with their structural panels. They have a really interesting, innovative interlocking panel system that makes for a very wind, rain, climate resistant structure. I have a very short time-lapse video of a Habitat for Humanity house with R26 insulation, that's a grade of insulation, being set on site. So I'm going to play that for just a moment. So you can see that this didn't look like a regular stud framed home. These panels are delivered to the site and they have an interlocking system. These particular panels were tested 400 times stronger, 400% stronger than a regular stud frame construction, and they can be installed in a fraction of the time with about half of the crew size. So back to systems thinking. What is systems thinking? So systems thinking is the process of understanding how everything works in a holistic manner. Everything has systems and everything works together as a whole. This systems thinking assists with buildings as a system and helps us understand how all the systems in a building works together. This is the foundation of building science. And yes, that is an actual science. And the best way I can think to explain it to you all is the way I explain it to my students in the building science class that I teach, is that buildings are a lot like a body. A body has systems and it needs assessed and it needs diagnosed. And there's not always an easy connect the dots to figure out the problem. But if you're looking at everything as a system, you can kind of follow those dots. We also have a tendency to treat our bodies and our buildings in regards to health in the same way. We are very reactive and we are not very proactive. So one of the benefits of systems thinking, of building science and green building is that we are trying to reverse that. We are trying to be proactive instead of just reactive, which is extremely important. So what would be some of the additional costs of green building? You can see on this slide, it's a very good stat slide. You can see on the left, you have your average building costs for a $150,000 home, and then the premium cost of a green home, which is only about 2% more. And then you can see the 25% energy savings annually that you get out of that 2% premium. The average payback for this 2% premium ranges from about 3 years to 5 years, depending on whether you're using government rebates or incentives. And there are quite a few. What particularly interested me on this slide was the perception versus reality. If you can read that, and I'll read it out loud because I'm not sure how clear it is, but there is a section on this slide that says, that asks the question, if there is two building professionals, if there is a significant cost difference between green building and standard building products and practices, 62% of building professionals answered yes. They believe there is a significant cost difference. Now, as I read this from a building science perspective and working in the community college environment, helping bring up our next generation of construction industry workers, what does this mean in regards to the skill and education of our current workforce to help move green building into the future, into what needs to be done? I see this as not a completely negative, because this gives us a wide open arena for educational opportunities, workforce development, and massive job creation in the future. So we have some more information on green affordable housing, and I am going to turn over to Diane Coleman for the next slide.
Thank you, Roxanne, and thank you all for being here and listening so intently about how we can impact our communities. I want to just go back to the slide before this on green building costs, because I feel like I hear this every day in my role, and LEED is something we'll get into and talk about a little bit as it relates to homes, as well as other commercial buildings where we all live, work, and play. Green buildings may or may not cost more than the standard conventional building. And it's because of if you look at the added value and just what Roxanne was saying about looking at it from systems thinking, right? And so many in the architect, engineer, and construction community, they look at life cycle costs, right? To determine the most cost-effective option among competing alternatives, really based on the cost of options. So it really depends on what you're building, where you're building it. And again, direct costs can be more. I would say for homes, single family homes, you're looking maybe 1 to 2%. You get higher than that for more extensive buildings, but also consider that there are those additional costs of green building that are recovered in long-term savings. And I'll give you one example that I have personally been able to witness is a LEED certified school that was correctly oriented on a site and incorporated more natural lighting and operable windows to take advantage of really east-west breezes, and they reduced their energy costs. Therefore, that's a long-term savings. I know I heard in our our reflection about trust that it is that we trust the places we live. And I want to approach affordable housing as part of our topic this evening. We could have a whole evening talking about affordable housing, of course. And when you think about, green building costs being a little bit more and the average paybacks we talked about, I also want you to think about kind of 4 pillars that align with affordable housing, increasing availability to high quality housing now for the long-term benefits and for better communities and neighborhoods in the long term. So affordability and equity mean access to jobs, education, and even civic engagement. When we have healthy buildings with low toxicity materials and good ventilation and social determinants of health like affordability, location, quality are values that we all want to advance. So the green fundamentals are critical to resilient communities. Green affordable housing and the emerging trends that influence that sector are examples of what the U.S. Green Building Council calls our 4 pillars of sustainable, equitable, healthy, and resilient communities. And by doing that, I wanted to just remind you that, that does make kind of the quality of life more affordable. I have a book recommendation that we'll send later with the resources. And there's a recently published book. It's called Blueprint for Greening Affordable Housing. The author, Kimberly Vermeer, and co-author Walker Wells make the case that the consistent adoption of green building practices enables affordable housing organizations and practitioners to lean into green building trends and respond to emerging concerns such as COVID. And I know there's a question that came up a little bit about, the air circulation that we'll get to, but that is certainly in systems thinking, understanding the indoor air quality in the indoor environment is important. The authors of the book I mentioned did define an opportunity that affordable housing, is often separate from the markets, the real estate markets we might engage with. So it's going to take work and education and engagement that really we're all supporting this together. So again, I appreciate you taking in all this information. There's a wealth of it. Seeking opportunities to think about federal efforts, and I'll talk a little bit about the advocacy and the state efforts as well. But it really is about, looking for programs, low-income tax credit programs at a state level, how developers can even compete to get credits, lower operating costs, durability, and health and value proposition are the reasons that we look to green building.
Thank you very much, Diane, for that. And I am also going to talk a little bit about green building from a little different perspective, and the fact that whether we're going to talk with weatherizations and retrofitting. They are an extremely important part of the affordable housing movement. And the services that weatherization and retrofitting provide most times are core green building practices. And a lot of these services are simple fixes and can be DIY if you're into that kind of thing. Some of the typical services in regards to weatherization and retrofitting include things like insulating, adding additional insulation to your floors, your walls, your attics, sealing your ducts, your internal ducts, installing a smart thermostat. Something as simple that all of us can do, that all of you can do tomorrow, would be to upgrade all of your old lighting to LED lighting, which has massive energy savings, and LED lighting does not put off the same type of heat that regular older style light bulbs do. So you're recouping a lot of the energy from not having so much heat from those bulbs, as an example. These programs these weatherization and retrofit programs for the low income and affordable housing communities, they specifically usually target families that come within the 200% of the federal poverty level. That's what it's 200% of the federal poverty level. But people of any age can apply, although priority is given to elderly, disability, people with disabilities, homes with children, and those are usually the priority because funds tend to be limited. I've put together a list of just a few organizations that would actually impact Wake County specifically, because that is our audience. Rebuilding Together of the Triangle, I added as number 1 because they are my favorite for this. They are a nonprofit that serves Wake, Durham, Orange, and Chatham. They actually perform weatherization repairs and health and safety repairs free of charge to their communities. We also have a North Carolina version of the Weatherization Assistance Program, which is a federal program, and they help low-income residents reduce their energy bills, utility bills by providing energy assistance and weatherization assistance. And then you also have your local community action centers that are small organizations within your communities that work directly with these communities as a bridge to resources. Because a lot of times you may have issues where the communities are just not aware of what is available to them service-wise. And so these links work in this slide deck. So when it's distributed later, I would really like for y'all to click on these and kind of see what these programs offer for your areas. I think, Diane, this is actually your slide as well.
Yeah. So we've been talking about green building, and you know what that is, and you've heard us say, but something that influences green building is laws and regulations and code. And so from where you sit, there are some things I'd like you to listen to, and that might strike a chord with how you can make an impact in green building. And people care and they're motivated to become more sustainable, but why isn't the behavior change happening? And I point to it was a survey from Global Scan, and consumers, and this is worldwide, indicated they needed more support from a host of actors to really facilitate healthy and sustainable living. And they look specifically to governments and to companies to create an enabling kind of social infrastructure for behavior change at scale. So another survey in 2020 from the Healthy and Sustainable Living Study recorded really heightened environmental consciousness in the first year of the pandemic. And it really seems that this shift has been locked in. 73% of consumers globally agree that we need to reduce consumption to preserve the environment for future generations. And 52% say they feel guilty about having a negative impact. Perceptions, we talked about this, perceptions versus the reality of how much governments and large companies are doing to protect nature are really highly correlated with consumers taking personal action. So both at this point could be said to be underperforming, but that's why you're here. Suggesting an increased engagement by governments and the businesses that you support will likely drive more individual behavior change. And really, we see things like consumer goods now, technology, even food chain, taking action to protect the environment, and they're strongly linked to consumers' behavior change. So it signifies that consumer-facing brands can help drive changes, and you as consumers with everyday behavior can increase this engagement. And that really drives what goes into the laws and regulations. And I'll speak more to that in just a little bit. At the state level, a lot of you may know what's going on at the federal level, and I'm certainly happy to provide you some more resources that we'll be providing at the end of this program. But I wanted to catch you up with what we're doing here at the state level in North Carolina. And in 2007 was the Senate Bill 581. It allowed counties and cities to provide building permit fee reductions or even some rebates to encourage construction of buildings using sustainable design principles like LEED, leadership in environmental and energy design, and Green Globes, or there are other certification systems that you're aware of. So that was all the way back at 2007. And now January 7th, 2022, Governor Cooper signed Executive Order 246, strengthening the state's emissions reduction commitments. And Executive Order 246 builds on the climate commitments, which were really codified in Executive Order 80. These are all, sets North Carolina on a path to 40% reduction in statewide greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. That's not all that far away. And in the new version, emission targets were increased to a 50% reduction. And they're comparing it to 2005 levels, but that's also by 2030. The ultimate goal would be to achieve net zero emissions no later than 2050. And again, I probably don't need to tell this audience what impact that can have on our environment. And considering that residential and commercial buildings together account for about 47% of North Carolina's energy consumption, the state's analysis will likely find that policies that incentivize high performance buildings are key to achieving net zero. And that's where you're going to see some of these efforts being driven. Improving the performance of buildings, as we've talked about across the state, will require a mixture of measures, such as more stringent energy codes, structural and financial incentives, and the use of third-party certifications like LEED or Green Globes for both new construction and also we've been talking a lot about retrofitting, right? And existing buildings to really demonstrate a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. That is all part of the efforts taking place right here in North Carolina. And third-party certifications provide valuable transparency and really assuring all of us as taxpayers and the government that the projects are achieving a desired performance outcome. You can't do that without having a way to measure that and having certifications to track it and verify it. We're also working on several policies at the state level that I've noted here. Senate Bill 376 to restore lottery funding for schools, and Senate Bill 521 raise the roof, and House Bill 245 Efficient Government Buildings and Savings Acts. And again, I can give you more information in more detail, but by promoting green building policy in Wake County, there are things that interested volunteers can do as a starting point. And I'll talk a little bit more about the LEED programs coming up for communities and cities as well.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to some organizations, green building organizations in North Carolina. When thinking about this particular question, I chose 3 organizations that would be local to the audience we have today in our area here. I'm going to start with the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center and move upwards. That way, Diane can take the the USGBC slides afterwards. So move that forward. Starting with the North Carolina Clean Energy Tech Center. They're NC State based, and they provide services to businesses and citizens of the entire country, basically relating to the development and adoption of clean energy technologies. Excuse me. But one of their services that I find the most interesting, they have a very awesome database called Desire, or acronym Database of State Incentives for Renewables and Efficiency, which is a very comprehensive source for incentives and policies that support energy efficiency at all levels, including utility. So I actually took a screenshot. I did a search and I took a screenshot really quick, just so you all can kind of see what it looks like when you go on to their database. I just did a quick, I clicked on the state of North Carolina and took a screenshot. So this is not specific to anything, but it's a very useful site. Everything is in one location, which is always helpful. And you can find everything from regulatory policies for North Carolina and the United States federal policies. And there's also all of the incentives and rebates that are offered in regards to energy efficiency, and there are many for green building. So I would definitely recommend going onto their website and kind of playing around in this Desire database and seeing what incentives are in your area or for what you're interested in building. And also, if you're interested in policy, this is a location where it's all in one place for you. And second would be the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, or NCSEA. This organization I recently have started working for, and they are very active in policy and market development. We are member-based nonprofit, and we have a very large policy department that works hard to be present for policies that are energy efficiency based. The highlight of this for me is that last year around July, they merged with the North Carolina Building Performance Association. So now we have an increased intent focus on building performance and energy optimization programs. I think they've, you know, the conclusion is coming that you can have all the renewables and clean energy in the world, but if your buildings are crappy, you're wasting all of that energy. So it has to start, the solution starts from the beginning. You have to start from the beginning. They are also based out of Raleigh, North Carolina, so they are local. And then number 3 on the list was the U.S. Green Building Council North Carolina branch, and that is Diane's home.
Yes, thank you. I will give you a little bit of background, certainly happy to provide more information on what we do. My responsibilities are for the education and engagement across North and South Carolina. And I reside just north of the Charlotte area, but we have a number of, just like Roxanne was saying, we are member-based and we are nonprofit, and really I am driven by our membership and our advisory board, which is from all major cities across North and South Carolina. And we're here to transform the way buildings and communities are really designed, built, and operated, really enabling environmentally and socially responsible, as I mentioned, the 4 pillars: healthy and resilient communities that improve the quality of life for all. We support the achievements of this mission through education, advocacy, research, and an extensive network of local chapters, not just here in the Carolinas, but that shared knowledge base across the country in green building. We began developing the LEED rating, and many of you are probably familiar with that. If not, we can provide you more information. And we began certifying sustainability in the building industry. So providing that information not only to the architects, engineers, and construction professionals, designers, and you know, we can talk a lot about federal, state, and local governments are among those that adopt sustainable building practices and policies, but it may come down right down to your local level. Government agencies, utility companies, and manufacturers offer financial incentives for developers and owners to enhance the environmental performance of their buildings. And there are hundreds of LEED certified buildings across the Carolinas. And one example I was able to pull out that some of you may be familiar with, there's the John Chavez Memorial Park was added to the National Park Service Registry of Historic Places. And remember, this is public money, and the improvement project scope for LEED involved really a 2-story community center, full indoor gym, walking track, and I guess there's a carousel house. So it's a place I'm looking forward to being able to see. They were certified in December 2021 as a LEED facility.
Did I move too fast?
No, you're good. I'm catching.
Okay.
And again, we've been keeping you all, so I want to move quickly through the next few. The goal of LEED is really market transformation, right? To fundamentally change how we design, build, and operate our buildings and communities through a certification process that honors various levels of achievement in areas like energy savings, water efficiency, CO2 emission reduction, improved environmental quality, and stewardship of resources in total. Because for every building that exists, there's a community that surrounds it. So a little bit more on really the, how you can help support your community and green buildings. Within U.S. Green Building Council, we have an advocacy group. And this year, this is just kind of a summary of the things they were able to do. They meet with key officials of the administration and throughout the year. And, they emerged as USGBC emerges as a leader within the non-governmental and efficiency advocates community as well. So, I can, again, you will get this slide deck to be able to follow up, like Roxanne said, and see these links so that you can get more information on what's being done. And if you want to get involved with green building advocacy across our state. This is just another way we're having an impact. I took a quick snapshot for you to see. Probably can't see all the numbers, but as I mentioned, there are LEED certified facilities. There's even a LEED certified rest stop in off 321 in North Carolina that you should stop and see if you're ever heading over to Asheville from where you are. But our goal is to increase these LEED certifications and raise the awareness. And, we've talked about how many existing, not only homes, but buildings there are across the state. So it is also about LEED for operation and maintenance. You can be certified for the buildings. And again, the places we all live, work, and play, we want them to be more sustainable. One last program I just wanted to bring up because it is coming up quickly as a deadline. And I would say that for those of you who are nearby, the city of Durham has applied for LEED certification. This is a quick snapshot of my hometown, Cleveland. So if they can do it there, you could probably do it anywhere. But these are the cities that were certified LEED in 2020, Greensboro, North Carolina, in 2021, Charlotte. And it was a program with the support of Bank of America that we opened up applications, and those are open now until February 25th for the 2022 LEED for Cities Local Government Leadership Program. And there are a national cohort of US cities, towns, counties committed to LEED certification. And this will focus on also accelerating progress on sustainability and social equity. So since 2019, this program has been in place and directly engaged 50 cities, towns, and counties in a pursuit of really on institutionalizing sustainability and catalyzing action based on this certification process, as I mentioned, in many of the areas, and I'll show that in just a minute, that build the capacity of our communities for sustainability and resilience officers who can advance social equity through their work. but we'll get you some more information on that. And this is just the areas they look at. We talked about that systems thinking, the integrative process, looking at what's going on, where is that building located, the quality of life, the access to jobs, to transportation, water use. All of these are ways that we score or verify the performance measures for LEED certification in cities and communities. And with that, those are all of my comments.
Thank you very much. And this is our last slide. I think Diane said we've kept you guys a long time and we would like to get to some questions, but I know one of the questions that John had asked in the very beginning was, well, what can we do? What can local groups do? And my first thought was, you came here today. You've got some interest and you've started kicking that can down the road personally, and thank you for that. And I'm excited about the conversation that we'll have about that. But now that you know a little bit, you can begin to think about how buildings are designed, and then how to build and maintain and manage your own buildings. So local groups can support the green building movement. You can implement green building techniques in your own life. If you have an older home or a drafty home, or your energy bills are a little high and you're curious, you can hire an energy auditor. They'll come out and tell you, you know, where you could use some upgrades and then have those upgrades made. You can do the same thing with your businesses and with other buildings. You can also become a member of the local and state advocacy and nonprofits such as NCSEA and USGBC. They are already doing a lot of this work, but we always can use community partners to help push the message. You can contact your local and state governments to support some of these progressive policies and standards. And again, that kind of goes back to becoming a member of some of your nonprofits and advocacy groups, because they are already in the weeds with these processes. And again, they can use community support. From and more of a grassroots type of visual there, you can also advocate in your commonly lower income, low equity neighborhoods. They again don't always know about all of the programs available to them, and as community resources, y'all can be very impactful. And then there are organizations to support, such as the Rebuilding Together of the Triangle that we spoke about earlier. And there's another organization called Hope Renovations. These types of organizations, they do a lot. They help provide education, job opportunities, and energy efficient housing to low income households. So they can always use community partners and community champions. So to that end, that ends our presentation on green building. And again, I want to say thank you everybody for coming and listening and having this interest. It is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I know Diane's heart. We could have talked about this for hours and hours and hours. So if there are topics in regards to this that you would like expanded upon, or you would like to see additional information, or even another webinar on more specific topics, please let John know, and we can see about having something more expansive in the future. But if that's everything, I will pass it over to Liz, and she can see what's going on in the chat box.
Great, thank you. I'll replicate the applause that you would normally get in person. Thank you for a really great presentation. So we will open it up to questions. There are a number in the chat that I've tried to organize so that we can have a little bit of a structured conversation, but I want this to be a discussion. So there are things that Roxanne and Diane may not know, or they may have team members who they can report back. But we have a good variety of expertise in the room. So If you do have some insights or something you want to add to their responses, I encourage you to put it in the chat or raise your hand, use the little Zoom feature and we can call on you. I have a few people that I'm going to call out who have been responding to a few questions in the chat. But first, I'll ask, so a pretty specific question, Roxanne. Bob Rodriguez and Thomas Fletcher were both wondering about the eco panels that you showed with the Habitat for Humanity house. Are those only for new buildings or can they be used for retrofits as well?
That is a wonderful question. I don't know. All of the conversations I've had, all of the buildings I've seen built with eco panels has been on a new construction basis, primarily because what eco panels does, they take your design, your architectural design, and they actually model your wall panels after what your design is requesting. So they're able to build in your penetrations and your fenestrations, like your window cutouts and your outlets for electrical and the so I haven't seen it used on retrofitting per se, but if you needed a better envelope, I could definitely see it being a potential. The owner of Eco Panels, his name is Charles Leahy, and he is very open to questions. He's very responsive, and this is his passion as well. So he would be glad to answer any further questions, and I can share his information after this if anybody wishes.
Great. Yeah, and I know there's with prefabricated panels, there's certainly an efficiency of scale. So the more panels you need, the cheaper they become. So a lot of times in retrofit applications, they're not, if you just need one panel, it's not as cost effective. You also said that there was a 2% premium for green homes and an average payback period of 3 years. So John asked, given the minimum cost increase for green building, what can be done to promote higher efficiency standards in North Carolina housing?
Diane, did you want to grab that one?
Yeah, I can start there, right?
Okay.
It goes deep. So when
Yes.
it comes to a single home, right, we rely on the professionals who are educated and, know where to go for the resources. It's a lot more economical on a large scale, but there's some resources shared in the chat about the Green Home Building Guide that USGBC puts out, and there is a greater depth of resources there. And again, it depends on where the home is as to how much the increased costs are. I remember somebody else saying in the chat that, yes, utility costs are going up. So that may become, a greater return in the future for focusing on those additional costs. So hopefully I've answered that, or we can provide some more resources. Oh, and I know somebody else mentioned, Lowe's and Home Depot, they take sustainability very seriously. And so they are also good resources for homeowners doing renovations or projects.
Yeah, I think you're referring to your earlier comment from Linda Watson about reframing the upfront cost of green buildings with long-term savings. She said that 5 years to pay back the 2% higher cost than all savings. Given that utility bills will likely go up, savings could likely be higher. So I think it's partially just reframing the savings.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned also, Diane, the resources, Home Depot and Lowe's. I wanted to call out Ryan Snow, who seems to have lots of resources. Maybe Ryan, you could introduce yourself and speak to some of the resources that you mentioned.
Yeah, hey, thank you so much. Diane and I are on the same team at USGBC, so I was just trying to help out in the chat and put a few things in there. So she wouldn't have to go back and do it and could focus on the presentation. But yeah, USGBC has a ton of resources and they can be really hard to find sometimes. That's why I thought the Green Home Guide, for a lot of the questions that were there, they have different articles and you can find professionals and stuff like that. The other one that I put in was the Building Performance Institute, which is much more kind of on the energy side. But I think that can be good, even if you're not doing a renovation, if you just kind of want to know what are some of the simple things that you can do in your home to address energy and even health. They have all different types of certifications for contractors, essentially, that can help out in your home.
Great, thank you. And Bob Rodriguez had asked another question. I'm going to generalize it a little bit. How has system thinking and green buildings basically contributed to COVID mitigation strategies?
It's a very good question, specifics. Go ahead, Diane. I'm writing them down as I go, so
Okay, so
your brain's probably
I
working
just,
faster.
again, might point to what Ryan was mentioning, that there are a depth of resources, and at USGBC we call it education courses, but when it comes to our response in 2020, we actually have a COVID guide around building space, and I'm happy to share those resources down the road without getting into a lengthy conversation. And Liz, you may have a few things you've experienced in that conversation as well.
You know, my favorite report is the ASHRAE guide from 2014. ASHRAE, the American Society for Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers, produced a report in 2014 preparing for a pandemic, basically saying increase airflow, open the windows, you know, do all the things, social distancing, all the things that we're talking about today. So reading that document was very eye-opening, but the notion that buildings and air quality contribute to health, and particularly relating to viral spread, is not new information. It's just become an emergency now. So
Right.
My hope is certainly that it stays an emergency, not that COVID goes on forever, but that we continue to focus on the influence of buildings on humans, on health.
There's also even a medical term for it, and it's called sick house syndrome, where when the indoor air quality of your home is negatively impacting the health of the occupants. And we see a lot of that now, I think, with, you know, a lot of the homeschooling. You have children that may have asthma issues that may not have been exacerbated in a long time because they were going to school where the air was filtered. And now they're at home where the filtration is not optimal. And there's, you know, families may be seeing some exacerbations of medical issues, things like that. So there's actually a medical term for it. It's called sick house syndrome. But like Liz said, it's not new information. It's just becoming more poignant because COVID has us stuck at home all day. So we're noticing it a lot more, I think.
Yeah, certainly. Diane, Jennifer Roberts asked, is USGBC lobbying to continue to support climate solutions out of the failed Build Back Better bill? We hear that there may be pieces of Build Back Better that can still pass.
So the simple answer is yes, but I think there's more detail to that answer. Jennifer, I also appreciate you responding to the chat about it depends on what our local communities are doing, our local governments. So I will get you more information on that for sure.
And speaking of the local communities, local governments, Thomas Fletcher asked if related to the state legal and regulatory framework, isn't there a statewide board that sets building codes and ordinances several years into the future? I know, Jennifer, you spoke to Jennifer's response.
So
yes, yeah, go ahead, Roxanne.
No, you're fine. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say there are older building codes in both the Carolinas. That's where I was going to start, but go ahead.
So in regards to building codes, our building code council is currently reviewing a new set of building codes that will be adopted in January of 2025. So the committees are actively meeting now to kind of go over what the international codes have put out and pick and choose from that what they want to keep. The problem with that is the international codes come out every 3 years, but North Carolina only adopts building codes every 6 years. And with the amendments that we have a tendency to allow to pass on these codes, we are usually significantly behind. And building, and I'm specifically kind of focusing on the energy codes aspect of it, which is chapter 11 in our building codes. But we are significantly behind. We probably are more like the 2015 version of the International Energy Code. And Diane, do you agree with that?
Yeah, and I don't have the exact dates, but I do know that in the communities, you know, architects, engineers, and construction professionals, and they're trying to drive some of that change to codes.
And the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, we actively have a sitting member on the Energy Code Council Ad Hoc Committee at this time. So I'm in every Energy Code meeting. My colleague, Dr. Rita Joyner, is an active member on the Ad Hoc Committee. So we are paying very close attention to what is hoping to be what we would like to have adopted for our 2024 code. And our chairperson, and I can say this out loud because she put it out there, she would like to adopt it, the 2021 energy code, with as little amendments as possible, which would bring us, you know, a lot closer to the international code. We'll see if that happens. Fingers crossed.
That'd be great. That'd be great. I'm going to combine two questions here. How does LEED compare to Passive House certification? Are there Passive House developments in North Carolina? And would you speak about EPA rating systems such as Target Finder as ways to get started?
So I cannot speak to the Passive House or the other programs in comparison to LEED. What I can say overall is that you're looking for a certification that will be ongoing, kind of the continuous improvement, and we verify that. So that becomes, whether it's residential or commercial, the reason that we have a member-driven system of certification and continuous improvements in kind of what LEED tracks. I don't know enough about the others to comment and compare. I don't know if anybody else here has that information.
I can jump in, actually. I asked that question a little bit selfishly. I'm actually a certified Passive House consultant. There are a few of us here in North Carolina. I moved from New Orleans, so I'm still involved with the Gulf Coast region Passive House Alliance. So I'm a LEED AP and a Passive House consultant, and there are two programs that work really well together. LEED is a prescriptive program, so it means there's basically a checklist of things that you can fill out. It's more holistic than Passive House, because Passive House is a performance-based program and revolves entirely around energy. So you can get to a Passive House level, which will also help your LEED score as well. So it just gets to a very, very low level of energy, but it may not as directly address your sustainable site or your permeable materials or a lot of the other things that LEED addresses, indoor air contaminants, that sort of thing. So they work well together. They're just different approaches. And does anybody else want to jump in about EPA rating systems such as Target Finder? Do we have any expertise on that?
I can say a little bit about that. The Target Finder is part of Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which, you know, I think is a great tool. One of the greatest things about it is we're paying for it because it's from the federal government. So it's free, it's easy to be used out there, and can really help you to make some preliminary decisions where you use the Target Finder to say, hey, if I want to, you know, improve my energy efficiency by this much, what are some of these things I can do? What's the impact going to be? Energy Star also, I think, is really great, primarily with, as somebody had asked a question about faith-based institutions. There's a lot of great data sets that you can compare your building performance in the Energy Star tool against other buildings that are out there. USGBC has a similar product that actually integrates with that called ARC, which expands and looks a little bit more comprehensively at and some of the other factors, energy, water, which are in Energy Star, but then waste, transportation, and human experience. So there's a lot of great tools and resources from a technology perspective that are out there to help make decisions on a daily basis. So.
Great, thank you. Okay, I have a really exciting question from the chat. As we move to electrify personal transportation with more and more electric vehicles, will green buildings have to have more robust electricity infrastructure to support this change?
So again, I'll go with the overriding yes. I will say in the city of Charlotte and as part of the Lead for Cities program, right, you're also a point system, and EVs are having a huge impact on, you know, what everybody's plans are and what new buildings are taking place, and having, you know, access to those EV filling places. And I can only speak to the area I'm most familiar with around Charlotte, but that is definitely recognized in LEED buildings and LEED for cities and communities.
And, you know, speaking of emerging technologies, the question just popped up in the chat. Can someone share why stores and malls do not have solar power on roofs? Are there legal restrictions? What's holding us back?
That is the question. That is the $1 million question for all of these scenarios. What is holding us back? Why are we dragging our, why is anything dragged? This should have been the first, you know, these things should have been the first things we addressed. None of this information is new.
Mm-hmm. I have an answer for you related to, if any of you have been to a Tanger Outlets, they have made some great strides in involving their retailers to be LEED certified. I don't know how much of that includes solar or not at any of their other installations across the country, but I would bet that there are some. And it takes a company like the size of Tanger Outlets to impact those retailers and kind of bring them along in that education and engagement. Again, it's collaboration that will keep moving the needle.
And also, I think, and just looking at it from a critical thinking perspective, I think some of it may actually be the energy storage versus trying to link in, you know, using the grid-based solar where they can link into the grid. I think sometimes you have some not very good return of investments with the utility companies. But I can't speak to that as a professional, but I would think once our battery storage, our energy storage gets a little more efficient, smaller, easier to keep on site, we may see solar increasing on larger installations.
Ryan, you want to jump in?
Yeah, it's interesting. So in full transparency, I may be the only person on here who's not in North Carolina. I'm up in Washington. So it's interesting from a regulatory perspective as well as you know, the local utilities in DC. If I do a Google map thing, it's like I'm surprised at how many buildings around me have solar around them and individual homes and all these things, because there's really significant incentives and a commitment from the District of Columbia government. Same thing when you cross over into Maryland, but then when you go into Virginia, it's different. So to me, that says that's a regulatory issue in many cases, and the incentives and things that are there. So I know that in comparison, you know, the cost of electricity is also less in a lot of places, and that certainly has a big impact on it. So until, you know, energy prices go up and there's incentives and kind of the right climate that people can, you know, invest in on-site renewables, you don't see it happen. It's very interesting. You see it based off of the jurisdictions.
Yeah, it's a good point. Okay, next I want to double down on something Roxanne said about weatherization. That's the number one thing I always tell my clients. If you're going to spend any money moving towards a more sustainable home, weatherize your building. So Nancy asked, what are resources for weatherization and retrofitting old historic buildings and maintaining their character?
That is a great question. And the reason why I think it's a great question, not only because weatherization is kind of my thing, but I actually live in a home that was built in 1924 that was retrofitted in 2005. It was weatherized in 2005. And resource wise, what I know where we started was we had an energy auditor come out and evaluate where our problem areas were, which ended up being your common insulation, air sealing, and our crawl space needed some work. Our attic needed some work. The way they came into our home and did it is our walls are original shiplap pine, and they pulled a few planks off and they were able to put insulation in the walls that way. If you have an historic home, that the nice thing about weatherization is you can kind of with insulation is you can get it in there and then you're always going to have better than what you started with, especially with the older homes. I don't know of any resources. It was but the primary point is to find out where your problem areas are in the first place. And then you can look at the aesthetics of your building and find the best way to address those particular areas. We still have some problems in areas that we just couldn't reach without doing damage to the period, the 1920s, like period aesthetics of the home, but it was definitely doable. And my electric bill, you know, is manageable, and we don't freeze in the winter. So,
so
this house will be here a long time.
Trick question for you. So say you're winning $10,000 to spend on your home. Would you buy solar panels, get an electric vehicle, or weatherize your home?
Personally,
Yep.
I would weatherize my home.
Mm-hmm.
I would take, with what I know now, I would take that $10,000 and I would have my crawl space encapsulated.
Yeah, and part of the reason I asked that is I see Linda's comment in the chat. I'm surprised that virtually no new homes in my neighborhood have solar, and I'm actually not surprised by that. You never know how a home is insulated, what the performance of it is. The goal is always to lower your load before adding renewable energy. So get the load down as low as possible, and then supplement what you need with renewables.
Right. It goes back to the point of we can have all of the renewables in the world, but if our buildings are junk, it's all for nothing.
Right.
We are wasting it. We're wasting it, just wasted. So we're putting all this focus into renewables because it's kind of an easy thing to see. You see solar panels, you see wind turbines, you can understand that. But when you start talking about building performance and building science, and people just kind of glaze and it just doesn't sink. And there's an education gap that needs to be addressed in our current workforce, because as a homeowner, I would not know of any of these things. I would expect my builder to know and to recommend these things to me. And that's just doesn't seem to be happening.
It takes too much effort on their part. You know, it's easier just to keep building as you've been building, you know. And
their costs go up to the homeowner because they're charging for skills they don't have, for the time it would take them to do it.
Ryan, I saw your hand was up. Did you want to jump in?
I was clapping.
Oh.
That's a great answer.
Okay, another, I think, Roxanne question about building technology. Can we speak about how water capture and utilization can be enhanced or added to buildings, given about 1/3 of North Carolina homes use groundwater?
Oh, I cannot answer that question with anything other than theory, or I don't know if anybody else has any on the panel knows more about water collection. It's kind of a specific niche in the building community when you're talking about. I can tell you that I have a on-demand hot water heater or water, you know, it only gives water when I need water. I don't have to constantly store it. We don't have a large water bill. I mean, there's optional technology out there. It's just finding somebody that knows it to be able to offer it to you. But that's a great question, and a great career field.
Yeah, and I think it's a similar thing as energy, you know, lower your consumption and then you can think about how you supplement it. You know, it's the mentality is always buy the stuff, buy the things, buy the technologies, but just use less, you know, use less water. And then once you start supplementing that water, you can use it to rainwater, for example, to flush toilets or irrigate your garden instead of using that, you know, necessary potable water.
Right. Or upgrade your dishwasher.
Yeah.
To, you know, to not something that's 15 years old and uses goodness knows how many gallons of water to wash, you know, 7 cups and 3 forks.
Right. That commercial that's out right now, you know, we do it every night, drives me crazy because it's saying that if you run your dishwasher every night, you'll save water, which is not true. You know, don't run it if it's not full. It drives me crazy. But I really wish we could spend all night having this conversation. You know, Roxanne and Diane, you guys have such great expertise, and I'd really love to continue it.